Welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 329, Game Winning Assist. The episode begins with Ash and the gang running through a dark cave known as Fiery Path. Why were they running, you may ask? Well, it's because while they were just peacefully going through Fiery Path, Skitty had forcibly popped out of his Pokeball, disturbing some Slugma who were just peacefully walking by when Skitty just attacked them. So yeah, they were running to get away from the Slugma, who were now angrily chasing them, as Max complained about how this wouldn't have happened if Skitty hadn't come out of his goddamn Pokeball and started attacking. Though May tried to rebuttal that it wasn't Skitty's fault, it didn't purposely try and get them almost murdered by these Slugma, and stated that they didn't have time to argue right now, since they had to run. Max agreed, although he commented that the way they were currently running didn't seem the best way to take, as there was no exit in sight. But May just told Max to keep running, sure that there would eventually be an exit. Skitty started to get nervous and wiggle around, as May tried to comfort it, telling it to calm down. The Slugma then started using Flamethrower, as Ash and the gang continued to run, while leading Brock to suggest that they speed the fuck up and try and find a way out. Thankfully, Ash saw a crack in the cavern wall and got a bit of hope as he told Pikachu to use Iron Tail to create an escape route. So Pikachu very quickly destroys the rock wall, causing a huge explosion of smoke from the destroyed rock. But the smoke soon clears as Pikachu stands in front of the newly formed exit, and Ash and the gang race through and leave the cave, which is where the Slugmas stopped, as they didn't want to leave their home. However, as Ash and the gang ran out of the cave, they found themselves on a steep hill, and they tumbled down. After getting several grass stains from falling down the hill, they eventually make it to the bottom. Now in the middle of an open field. Max was the first one to stand up, holding his head in pain, and the others soon stand up, and they all ask each other if they were all right, and they all confirm this, and state how that was a very close call. They almost fucking died, as they were almost knocked out when they fell, and May comments that that was the worst fall that she's ever experienced. Yeah, I don't know about that, I think you guys have had worse falls. But anyways, Skitty suddenly runs off, and May tells it to come back, but May then sees that Skitty had found a singular Numel sleeping close by, and it had approached it and started to sniff it, attempting to wake it up as it wanted to play with it, as it literally went all around it, sniffing every single part of its body. May was embarrassed by this, not wanting to disturb the sleeping Numel, although Ash, or any other member of the gang, didn't actually know that it was called a Numel, and Ash wanted to know what kind of Pokemon it was, because he'd never seen it, so he uses his Pokedex to find out that it was a Numel, just as Skitty started to headbutt it, desperate to wake it up. May got angry at Skitty at this point, because she was reminded that Skitty using Headbutt was what disturbed the Slugma, and that resulted in them having to run out of the cave, so she didn't want Skitty to disturb this Numel and make them all have to run again, so she told Skitty to fucking stop, but Skitty just continued to Headbutt, as well as Double Slap the Numel, so May got so angry that she recalled it into its Pokeball, complaining about Skitty and its disobedience, wondering what she was going to do with it, as Ash and Brock were just amazed how Numel hadn't woke up yet, with both of them stating that Numel must have been really sound sleepers. Just then, though, Numel did start to wake up, as steam erupted from its back, and it started to get to its feet, leaving Ash and the gang to watch in suspense, wondering what the Numel was going to do, and wondering if it was bitchy from Skitty hitting it, as the Numel approached a nearby tree, and then got on its hind legs and started to eat the fruit on the tree, which were some berries of some kind. Ash and the gang were relieved, as the Numel seemed to be only interested in the berries, when suddenly a furret approached it, closely followed by many more Numel, and a girl who was calling out to this Numel by the tree, happy to have found her Numel as she joined it by the tree, and invited it to come back with the rest of the Numel. Just then, though, Brock, being attracted to her as he was with any woman, called out to her, proclaiming his love, causing the woman to notice Brock and the rest of the gang. She actually seemed flattered by Brock's proclaiming of love, and introduced herself as Julie, though questioned who Ash and the gang even were, and why they were in the area, having never seen them before. And this led Ash and the gang to introduce themselves, although Brock rushes up to Julie, interrupting Ash, May, and Max, and slowly introduces himself, talking about himself, and flirting with her, as usual. Brock was then interrupted, though, as the Numel that was right next to him spouted out some steam, causing him to jump in pain, being burnt, making Julie laugh. The Numel that just burned Brock soon leaves Brock, though, as it noticed a second fruit tree in the distance and happily ran to go eat some. Julie called for it, not wanting it to go away again, but it didn't stop going, so she sent her Furret to stop it from making it to the tree. So Furret jumped in front of Numel, forcing it to sadly go back to Julie, even though it wanted to eat some goddamn berries on the tree, although Julie promised that she would give Numel some of her own berries back at her ranch. She just didn't want Numel to get used to the ones on the wild trees, since that would mean that Numel would just continue to run away from her, and it may never come back one time. Upon hearing about this ranch, Ash was intrigued, as he thought that that might mean that he could see even more Numel at this ranch, and he thought Numel was a pretty cool Pokemon, seeing it try and fend for itself, getting some berries. Julie confirmed that yes, she did raise all these Numel at a nearby ranch, and this particular Numel that was just by the tree escaped, and she had been looking for it. Upon seeing the hole in the cave, Julie realized that Ash and the gang must have come out of the cave from the Fiery Path, and stated that they must have been wanting to get to Lava Ridge Town, claiming that she always saw people that she never usually saw around the area going to Lava Ridge Town from Fiery Path. And also claimed that she'd actually seen many other trainers make their own makeshift exits to Fiery Path because of Slugma disturbing them, and asked if Slugma had disturbed Ash and the gang as well, and they confirmed this. Anyways, knowing that Ash and the gang were likely on their way to Lava Ridge Town, since that's usually where people were going after coming out of Fiery Path, she let them get on their way, although Ash and the gang were interested in seeing the Numel Ranch, so she invited them to it, even stating that she would let them stay for the night and make them some food. Ash and the gang happily accepted the invitation to the ranch, but Brock stated that Julie had no need to cook because he would gladly cook instead, and Max, May, and Ash assured Brock that this would be a good idea. So Julie allowed this, and they made their way back to the ranch, with the Numel coming along as well, with Julie explaining that she herded the Numel as they approached the ranch and could see it in the distance. Although, before Julie could go into more detail as to how she herded them, Brock butted in, trying to flirt with Julie again, startling everyone. Max whispered to Brock, telling him to quit flirting, stating that he may actually have a chance with Julie if he would stop being weird and would stop flirting, since he was a breeder and she was a herder, and they were relatively similar, because they both took care of Mons. Ash and the gang and Julie then arrive at her ranch, and Ash and the gang help Julie herd in all the Numel into their pen as Team Rocket watched with binoculars from atop a tree. Meowth was the first one to spot all the Numel, and Jesse and James were both very excited by the prospect of capturing Numel for themselves, because James remembered he had Numel to keep him warm when he was asleep, when he was little, and still with his family in the mansion, and Jesse declared that they should sell the Numel. James and Meowth agreed with this, along with Wobbuffet, who forcibly popped out of its Pokeball, although James added that they should only sell some of them and use the other Numel to make Team Rocket their own personal sauna bed. Jesse was convinced, so Team Rocket cheered, along with Wobbuffet, declaring that they were going to sell some Numel and make their own sauna. Anyways, back with Ash and the gang. Once all the Numel were herded into their pen, Julie gave them all berries in a bucket, just like she promised, causing all the Numel to eat happily, releasing steam because of this happiness. Even though Brock was only slightly interested in the Numel, unlike Max, who was very interested, he and Max both went up to Julie and asked if they could be of assistance and help her with the Numel, with Brock asking because he wanted to impress Julie. Julie permits them to, so Max starts to brush a Numel while Brock takes the bucket of food. Julie was confused, questioning what Brock was doing, as she thought that he was just going to do some brushing as well, but Brock stated that, as a great breeder, he wanted to do more than just brush. He wanted to provide his help in other areas that related to helping out the Numel as well, stating he would do any chore that Julie asked, making Julie flattered, as she allowed Brock to do whatever he wanted with the Numel, trusting him. So Brock went up to one of the Numel and placed the food basket by it. As the Numel started eating, though, it was so happy to have great berries that it happily steamed his face, causing Brock to cry out in pain. Man, he was just trying to be helpful, damn. Meanwhile, May was trying to think of a way to stop her Skitty from always running off, and she came to the conclusion that Skitty basically just had way too much energy that it needed to burn off, so she came up with the idea to have Skitty learn how to battle so that it could burn off its energy while battling, instead of having to run off in the middle of nowhere. She goes to Ash, who was standing in front of Julie's house, and requests a battle with him, stating the reason, and Ash accepted, although Julie then arrived with her Furret, and pleads May to have Skitty battle her Furret instead, because she really wanted to battle, since Julie or Furret never got to battle that often, since there wasn't a lot of people who came by who wanted to battle. May was excited by this, as she had already battled Ash with other Pokemon before, but she'd never battled Julie nor her Furret, so she accepted Julie's challenge, forgetting about her battle with Ash, as she sent out her Skitty and had it on one side of the ranch field, while Furret was on the other side of the ranch field. May advised Skitty to watch for its movements and take the battle slow, instead of just rushing in all willy-nilly, because she kind of wanted to teach it not to do that. However, Skitty disobeys, as it just follows Furret around, trying to get as close to it as possible, as it chased its tail, with Furret trying to get away, though Furret was confused as to why Skitty was trying to bite its tail. Yeah, that was the reason why Skitty was chasing Furret in the first place. It liked its tail, so it wanted to bite it. May tried to command Skitty to stop going after Furret's tail, but Skitty doesn't listen, but then suddenly Julie tells Furret to stop, and it does so, and this causes Skitty to get hit by Furret's tail, since when Furret stops moving, its tail lowered down, and it hit Skitty right in the face, causing it to fall down. Ash encouraged Skitty to get up, as did May, and Skitty was able to get up, although it looked pretty weak. Despite this, May told Skitty to tackle Furret, but since Skitty was so tired, it missed. And Furret was so fast, so it missed yet another tackle, and it missed a double slap, which just ends up making Skitty even more tired, which worries May. Just then, though, Julie declared that she didn't want to lose a battle where her opponent wasn't fighting at her best, and suggested that Skitty had to know more than just 2 attacks, double slap, and tackle, and suggested that May check her Pokédex to see what other attacks Skitty had, and sure enough, when May looked at her Pokédex, she learned that Skitty had another attack she wasn't aware of, as she smiles at this, and orders Skitty to use this attack, being Assist. Having learned from her Pokédex that Assist was a special move that made a Pokemon able to copy moves of other Pokemon that were in its trainer's party, so that meant that Skitty could use moves from Beautyfly or Torchic. So, Skitty tried firing an Ember, but Furret just dodged this, despite Julie being caught off guard, and Ash was caught off guard as well, never having heard of Assist before. Anyways, May tells Skitty to try Assist again, and this time it releases an attack from Beautyfly, being a Gust, making Ash even more impressed with Assist, but Furret just dodges this again, leading May to comment on Furret's amazing speed, as Furret knocks out Skitty with a Slam attack. May instantly rushes to Skitty and picks it up to make sure it was okay, and Ash comes up to it and asks the same question, as May declares that Skitty would be fine, it likely just needed some rest, because it just looked tired, it didn't look super injured. Then Julie comes up to May and congratulates her and her Skitty on putting up quite a tough fight. May thanked Julie for the compliment, and then wondered if Julie happened to know more about the move Assist, since she figured that Skitty might know it, and Julie just says that she knew from doing research on some Pokemon that Skitty could learn Assist, while Ash was still in disbelief that a move like Assist even existed, not understanding how he had never heard about it before, and he asks if any Pokemon could learn the move Assist, as he wanted his Pokemon to be able to use any move from any of his other Pokemon, because then really any of his Pokemon could be interchangeable in terms of moves, but Julie confirms that only certain Pokemon, such as Skitty and a few others, could learn Assist, making May excited, knowing that she perhaps had an advantage over certain other trainers if only Skitty could learn Assist. Remarked how she practically had all three of her Pokemon in one when it came to Skitty. May then began to think about what she could use her Skitty for, as night fell, so Ash and the gang and Julie went inside Julie's house for the night. With Ash and the gang definitely ready for some rest after walking for so long. Julie then feeds homemade Pokeblocks to Skitty and Pikachu, which Skitty particularly enjoyed, perhaps loving this dinner even more than Brock's Pokemon food. Anyways, Skitty was sitting on the table with Pikachu, while Ash, May, and Julie were sitting around the table on sofas, when May questioned where Julie had gotten the Pokeblocks in the first place, leading Julie to explain that before she was a rancher, she used to be a Pokemon coordinator. May was intrigued by this, and even more intrigued when Julie commented that May's Skitty would be useful for contests, especially with its assist move, but it just needed more practice, stating that its speed and power would be very useful for contests as well. Just then, Max comes into the living room from the kitchen where he and Brock had been working, exclaiming that dinner was ready for the humans. So, Ash, May, and Julie entered the kitchen to find Brock and Max having cooked an amazing feast, with Brock explaining that besides being a good breeder, he can also cook, with Max adding that he helped a little bit, although Brock tried to downplay Max's helping, as he wanted to impress Julie, and Julie sure was impressed, as she happily took her seat, ready to dig in, with Ash stating that it looked very, very tasty. And I mean, there was like mounds and mounds of food there, dude. Damn. Even May was impressed as well. It looked like the table was about to break from all the food. Meanwhile, later that night, when everyone had went to sleep after the meal, Team Rocket had refined their plan and decided to combine both James' idea of making a personal sauna and Jesse's idea of selling them into one. They would sell the Numel as personal saunas, so they could keep one for themselves, and then the other Numel could be personal saunas. And basically, the more Numel that a person bought, the stronger the sauna would be. Anyways, now that they had their actual plan sorted out, it was time for them to actually put it into action, as Team Rocket snuck onto the ranch, using a gigantic Numel mech, and they immediately spotted, once they came over the hill to the ranch, all the Numel sleeping soundly in their pen. Once the mech got close enough to the pen, Meowth excitedly claimed that this was the moment they'd been waiting for. They weren't going to fail their plan this time, although Jesse advised that Meowth should quit fucking talking and just begin actually taking the Numel, as Wobbuffet forcibly popped out of his Pokeball to agree with this, as Meowth pressed a button from inside the Numel mech, which caused a mechanical hand, as well as a second mechanical hand, to appear from the hole on the robot Numel's back. And the two hands immediately began to grab the asleep Numel and put them inside the hole of the mech, where the hands had come from in the first place. They stole the Numel one by one, though, so it was a relatively slow process, and during this process, it made quite a bit of noise. This noise caused Furry, who was sleeping on the floor beside Julie, who was sleeping soundly in her bed, to wake up. Furry lazily got up and looked out the window and screamed at what it saw, being Team Rocket's mech. This scream awakens Julie, along with Pikachu, who was in the same room as Julie and Furry, and Ash and the gang were as well, but they were just so tired that they remained sound asleep. At first, Pikachu and Julie didn't know what Furret was acting up about, but Furret directed them to the window, and they saw the mech as well. So, Pikachu hurriedly woke up Ash, May, Brock, and Max, and brought them to the window so they could see what was going on as well, instantly ending the confused state that Ash and the gang were in, because they were obviously very startled to have been woken up in the middle of the night. Anyways, upon seeing the mech, everyone rushed outside the house to the field, after stumbling on their clothes and Skitty popping out of its Pokeball forcibly and joining everyone. Julie obviously came along as well, so when Ash and the gang and Julie confronted the mech, Julie immediately asked who the fuck was driving it and what the fuck was going on, leading Team Rocket to come out from the Numel mech's head and do their motto. About to reveal what they were going to do with the Numel, but Julie asks them first, so they happily explained their plan that we already knew, which was to steal them and to sell them as saunas. And James began to fantasize about making his own sauna with Numel as well, and one of the few things he wanted to revisit from his childhood, the heat of a Numel. And Jesse and James pleaded to Ash and the gang to just let them have this victory for once and not interfere, but Ash obviously refused this, as he had Pikachu use Thunderbolt, but Team Rocket just laughed as they jumped back inside the mech to dodge the Thunderbolt, and the mech was immune to the Thunderbolt, so it wasn't even damaged, because, as Meowth explained, as most of their shit was now, this mech was electric-proof. Wobbuffet then forcibly pops out of its Pokeball to taunt Ash and the gang, as Meowth explains that there was actually a justification for the Numel mech being electric-proof, since the real Numel, being fire and ground types, were immune to electric attacks, since ground types were immune to electric attacks. Soon enough, while Team Rocket had been talking, all the Numel had been captured, so Meowth pushed really hard on the mech's lever, causing it to charge forward as Team Rocket left the ranch, although Ash and the gang jumped in the way, not wanting them to get away with the Numel, meaning that they were right in the mech's path, about to be run over, making Ash and the gang scream in fear, but they held their ground. Still a decent ways away from the mech, although Skitty then got closer, as it viewed the mech as a real Numel to play with, and rushed over up to it to go play with it, leading May to call for it and chase after it, not wanting it to die and get run over by the mech. May does manage to grab a hold of Skitty, right before Skitty got trampled, but Skitty had already grabbed hold of one of the Numel mech's arms by this point. So May tried to yank Skitty off of the arm, but Skitty refused to let go by the time the Numel mech jumped up into the air. doing so by digging into the ground with the mech's hands that May and Skitty were currently hanging onto. Why did it jump, you may ask? Well, it's because it figured that if they ran over Ash and the gang and Julie, then it could basically mess up the movement of the mech if Ash and the gang's dead body parts were caught. So they decided, thankfully for Brock, Max, Julie, and Ash, to jump over them. But unbeknownst to Team Rocket, May and Skitty had grabbed on to the mech's hands, right? So when Team Rocket declared that they didn't need the arms anymore and recalled them back into the Numel mech's hole, this meant that May and Skitty ended up in the hole as well, with all of the Numel. Team Rocket then cheered at their plan actually being successful, as they then took off into the distance in their Numel mech, as fast as they could muster. Even though Max always got into arguments with May, he had to admit that he cared about her and was very worried about her, declaring that they had to get May back, and Brock and Ash promised that they would do everything they could to find her and get her back. Just then, thankfully, Julie had a truck that she could use, and she immediately got inside and then drove it up to Ash, Brock, and Max, and told them to get in, as she wanted to go after the mech as well to get her Numel back. So, Julie turned the truck's lights on, and Ash, Brock, and Max got in the back, and they took off, determined to chase after Team Rocket's mech and get back May, Skitty, and the Numel. Meanwhile, as Ash, Brock, Max, and Julie followed, May and Skitty tried to wake up the Numel, who were still sleeping despite being captured. Unfortunately, no matter how much Skitty and May tried, they couldn't wake up the Numel. So, this effectively kiboshed the plan that May had come up with, which was to wake up the Numel and have them tackle their way out of the mech to break it. But since the Numel couldn't be woken up, May tried to just have Skitty tackle their way out of the mech, although Skitty was too light, so when it used tackle on the mech, it just bounced off. Although Skitty ended up bouncing into a Numel, which actually woke it up. And things actually get even better, as the Numel realizes that it was no longer at Julie's ranch, and panics and screams out, which wakes up all the other Numel. Meanwhile, Team Rocket was in the cockpit of the mech, and they were planning what they were going to end up doing with the Numel. With James and Meowth excited about having a sauna of their own. And they fantasized about it in their heads, although Jessie stated that instead of saunas, maybe they should actually use the Numel as heat for barbecues to cook really good food. James and Meowth liked this idea, imagining the feast they would have thanks to the Numel now, but then Jessie changed her mind, stating that they could actually just sell the Numel and use it to buy a tropical island that came with a whole bunch of food that was already pre-made, so she could eat anything that she wanted at any time of day. And Meowth and James were drawn in by this, and that was officially what they were going to do with the Numel. They've done a whole bunch of planning, but they'd finally come up with their final goal. Just then, Team Rocket's fantasies were interrupted, as they heard a loud racket coming from the back, where all the Numel, along with, unbeknownst to them, May and Skitty were, and this loud racket was all the Numel now tackling the side of the mech, trying to escape. Well, all of the Numel, aside from one, because one was somehow still asleep during all this, and May was trying her best to wake it up. Before May could wake the Numel, though, Meowth was aware of what the source of the noise was, and he laughed, as he said he came prepared for the Numel trying to escape, as he pressed a button in the cockpit, and a sprinkler went off in the back, putting out the steam of the Numel, which made them weak, and put them to sleep again. Leaving May shocked at first, because she didn't know that there was a fucking secret sprinkler system that was hooked up at the top of the back. Anyways, with all the Numel now asleep again, May was stressed, not knowing what to do, when suddenly it was revealed that the water coming down actually startled the one Numel that was still asleep before the water came down, and it actually woke that Numel up, and alerted May that it was awake by yawning. While all this was going on, Julie, Ash, Brock, and Max in Julie's truck were able to now see the Numel mech in the distance, catching up with it, and they only got closer to it as Julie sped up. Meanwhile, back in the back of the Numel mech, despite that one Numel waking up, it didn't do any good for May at the end of the day, because although the Numel tried its best to tackle the side of the mech to break free, it couldn't after many tries, and got tired and fell back asleep, saddening May. But then, she came up with an idea, remembering Skitty's ability to use Assist. So, May tells Skitty to use Assist, thinking that it may unleash an attack that could wake Numel up, and the attack that Skitty ends up using is a Gust. So although May thought the Gust was a little too strong for just waking up Amon, it did end up waking up the Numel. And immediately after this, May quickly thinks and orders Skitty to use Assist again, hoping it would use an Ember this time, since an Ember could power up Numel's hole to give it some firepower. And sure enough, Skitty did end up using Ember, which powered up Numel, also putting Numel out of the groggy state it was in from just waking up. And since the Numel was powered up, it used a flamethrower on all the other Numel to make a steam come out of their backs and make them wake up as well. And then May cheered as all the Numel began firing flamethrowers all around the inside of the mech to try and break out. May then picked up Skitty and held it so it didn't have to stand on the ground, since because of the flamethrowers almost breaking through the walls, the ground was getting hotter. And Team Rocket was alert to this as their cockpit began getting hotter and started to kind of ignite in flames as well. Jessie gets furious, knowing that the Numel were likely responsible for the increase in temperature, as she orders Meowth to press a button in the cockpit again, which activates the sprinkler again. Meowth does this, which stops the Numel from firing their flamethrowers and makes them tired again, but thankfully they were only stopped for a few seconds because May had expected that Team Rocket may try and use the sprinkler again, so she came prepared and had Skitty ready to attack as it used Double Slap to destroy the sprinkler, stopping the water, and allowing Numel to continue to use flamethrower and not be tired anymore. Team Rocket gets furious as they notice that the sprinkler must have failed, because not only was the control room extremely hot, but the room and the controls were now on fire, making Team Rocket panic, as suddenly the flamethrower was able to destroy the mech, making it tip over, and this makes the head come off, allowing May and Skitty and the Numel herd to rush outside. May then congratulates all the Numel on working together with their flamethrowers to take out the mech, when suddenly Team Rocket emerge, having climbed out of the remains of the tilted over mech, extremely battered and tired, and angry at May and Skitty for escaping, and they got even angrier when they saw Julie, Ash, Brock, and Max pull up in the truck. Since Team Rocket was just planning to easily recapture the Numel, since it was just May and Skitty and the Numel themselves they had to deal with, but now that Ash, Brock, Max, and Julie were there, they had less of a chance. Furret then comes out of the truck last, and Julie gratefully hugs all of her Numel, glad to see that they were alright. Although Team Rocket was hurt and discouraged, they refused to give up, trying to get the Numel back as they prepared for battle by sending out their Seviper and Cacnea to get the Numel back, although Cacnea hugged James first, prickling him, but James quickly shoved Cacnea off, and Seviper tried to use Poison Tail on Furret, although Furret dodged and used Slam on Seviper, knocking it out. Cacnea then went in for a Needle Arm, but before Cacnea could get the Needle Arm off on Pikachu or Furret, Pikachu intercepted, using a Thunderbolt to send Team Rocket blasting off. As Ash cheered, celebrating, congratulating Pikachu. Julie cheered as well, thanking Ash and the gang for their help, especially Pikachu, as she clapped in Pikachu's honor. Just then, though, the same Numel from earlier that had run off to go to the berry tree noticed the berry tree again, picking up that they were in the same spot as they were before, and rushed off, beginning to eat the berries, which May pointed out. However, despite being not very happy about Numel eating the fruit earlier, Julie was fine with it this time, as she remembered that since she was so occupied by Ash and the gang tonight, she didn't feed the Numel their dinner, so she permitted the Numel to eat the berries from the tree, just laughing. Ash and the gang and Julie then returned to Julie's ranch with all the Numel, and once the Numel were back in the pen, they all went to sleep for the night, and soon woke up the next morning with Ash and the gang ready to set off to Lava Ridge Town again, but not before Julie thanked Ash and the gang for all their help again, and told them directions to Lava Ridge Town, stating that in order to get there, they had to take a cable cart across a mountain up ahead, known as Mount Chimney, and then descend down Mount Chimney, and from there, they could get to Lava Ridge Town. And she then pointed out Mount Chimney in the distance. So Ash knew where he and the gang had to go, as he thanked her for the directions, and Brock tried to thank Julie by flirting with her, but Max pulled him away by the ear again, making Julie laugh. The episode then ends with Ash and the gang saying goodbye to both Julie, Furret, as well as her Numel in the pen, and then heading off to Mount Chimney to get to Lava Ridge Town.